"A beggar!" My nephew's voice cut through the clinking of silverware like a blade. He didn't even lower it. He wanted the whole table to hear. The laughter that followed was worse than the word itself. My own sister covered her mouth, as if hiding a smile, while my brother-in-law shook his head in mock pity. I sat there, my hands folded in my lap, feeling the heat creep up my neck. The roast on my plate had gone cold, but the shame burned hot. No one asked about the 20 years I'd given to this family, the times I paid their bills in secret, or the nights I stayed awake worrying about their debts. To them, I was just the quiet old man with worn shoes and calloused hands. That was the moment I knew it was over. Not the dinner. No, that night was the beginning of something else entirely, something they wouldn't see coming. I wasn't born into wealth, but I was born into work. My father used to say, "A man's worth is measured not by what's in his pocket, but by what he builds with his hands." And I took that to heart. By the time I was 16, I was waking up before dawn to help him repair fences for neighboring farms, fix leaking roofs, and lay brick walls in the summer heat. While other boys were chasing cricket balls or sitting in the cinema, I was learning the weight of a hammer and the patience it took to level a wall straight. I married young, too young perhaps, but my late wife Mira was the kind of woman who made struggle feel like partnership. We didn't have much in those early years. We rented a small, damp one-bedroom in the old part of town. The paint peeled in long curls, and the plumbing sang like a dying bird every night. But we saved. Every spare rupee went into a small wooden box we kept in the cupboard above the stove. Mira used to run her fingers over the lid like it was a treasure chest. "Someday," she'd say, "this will be the start of something that has our name on it." That day came slowly. Years of small jobs turned into bigger ones. I became known as the man who could fix anything: houses, machines, fences, even stubborn disputes between neighbors. By my late 30s, I'd saved enough to buy my first property, a crumbling 2-story building on the edge of the market. Everyone thought I'd lost my mind, but I saw what it could be. I spent months repairing it, replacing rotten beams, painting walls, rewiring old circuits. When I finally rented it out, the income was modest, but steady. That was the start of my quiet empire. One building turned into two. Two became 4. I never took on loans I couldn't repay, never chased risky ventures. I built slowly, like a mason laying brick after brick. My name was never on the front pages, but people in the property circles knew me as a reliable man, one who never broke his word. But family never saw that side of me. They only saw the calloused hands, the old car, the simple clothes. They didn't see the contracts signed in my name, or the bank statements I kept private. I didn't believe in flaunting wealth. It felt undignified. Over the years, I helped them more than they'll ever admit. I paid for my nephew's college fees when his father's business collapsed. I covered my sister's mortgage arrears during the recession. I even slipped money to my brother-in-law to keep his shop afloat when sales dried up. Each time, I told him it was a loan, but no one ever paid it back. Mira passed away 10 years ago. After that, I buried myself even more deeply into work, partly because I couldn't stand the quiet of the house, partly because there was no one left who cared enough to tell me to rest. That's when I started attending family dinners again, trying to fill the silence with familiar voices. But over time, I noticed the change. My place at the table shifted, literally. I was no longer seated beside the head of the family, but somewhere in the middle, between the younger ones who stared at their phones and the cousins who barely acknowledged me. And then came that dinner, that word, beggar. It didn't come from nowhere. The roots of it had been growing for years, hidden beneath polite smiles and forced greetings, and I had ignored them until that night. That was the last time I would ever come to the table empty-handed. The first cracks didn't come with loud insults or slammed doors. They came quietly, like hairline fractures in glass, too fine to see at first, but spreading underneath until one day the whole thing shatters. I remember the first time my nephew, Arjun, didn't look me in the eye. It was after I'd helped him secure his first job interview. I'd spent weeks pulling strings, calling in favors from old acquaintances. The day he got the position, I called to congratulate him. He answered with a distracted, "Yeah, thanks I guess," as though I'd only reminded him of a chore he hadn't finished. Then there was my sister, Anjana. She began introducing me to her friends with a laugh and a curious choice of words. "This is my elder brother, still working with his hands. Old habits, you know." She'd smile as though it was endearing, but I could see the faint wrinkle of her nose, the subtle tilt of her chin that meant less than. It became routine for them to speak about investments, vacations, and business ventures at family gatherings, their voices lifting with pride, then softening when I walked into the room, as though the topics were too sophisticated for my ears. One evening, at my niece's birthday party, I offered to help in the kitchen. My offer was met with a laugh from her husband. "No, no, uncle. You've done enough heavy lifting in your life. Go sit. The men here talk about markets and shares." The implication was clear. My work didn't count as business. Even the children picked up on it. Little things, comments about my old shoes, giggles when I pulled a slightly frayed wallet from my pocket. Children rarely invent cruelty. They inherit it. Still, I told myself not to take it personally. Families tease. Families misunderstand. But deep inside, there was a shift, an unease I couldn't ignore. The moment that truly opened my eyes came one Sunday afternoon. I overheard Arjun in the courtyard, speaking to a friend on the phone. His voice was casual, almost bored. "Yeah, my uncle? He's harmless. Just a simple man. Never made it big. You know the type." Never made it big. I had stood there, hidden behind the wall, my hands still wet from watering the plants, listening to a boy I had once carried on my shoulders reduce my life to nothing more than simple. It was in that moment I realized they weren't just underestimating me. They had erased everything I had built, and erasing someone is the first step to replacing them. The dinner that changed everything wasn't some grand holiday feast. It was an ordinary Sunday, the kind my family often used as an excuse to gather, eat, and trade gossip. I had brought a simple gift, a basket of fresh mangoes from an old friend's orchard. They were the kind you couldn't buy in stores, rich and golden, the flesh melting in your mouth. I thought it would be a small gesture, a reminder that I still knew how to bring something to the table. But as soon as I stepped inside, I could feel it. The temperature of the room wasn't warm. Conversations were hushed. Eyes slid past me quickly. My sister, Anjana, greeted me with a distracted hug, her gaze already moving over my shoulder. The meal began with the usual small talk, but soon the conversation shifted to money. Arjun was boasting about a property deal he'd helped broker for his company. His words were loud, each sentence punctuated with a proud glance at his father. The others chimed in with their own tales of profit and success. I stayed quiet. I'd learned long ago that real wealth doesn't need to be announced like a carnival, but my silence, it seemed, had become an open invitation for mockery. It was Arjun's wife, Pooja, who struck first. She looked at my shirt, a neatly pressed but clearly old one, and smirked. "Uncle, you really hold on to your clothes, don't you? I guess that's how you save money." A few chuckles followed, but Arjun wasn't content with just that. He leaned back in his chair, fork dangling from his fingers, and said, loud enough for the entire table to hear, "Well, it's not like Uncle has much to spend. He's practically a beggar." The laughter this time was unrestrained. My sister covered her mouth, pretending to hide a smile. Even my brother-in-law let out a low chuckle. I sat there, frozen, my fingers tightening around my fork until my knuckles turned white. In that moment, my mind didn't run to the years I had helped them, the debts I had quietly forgiven, or the sacrifices I had made. It went to Mira. I imagined her sitting next to me, hearing them speak to me that way. The thought made my stomach twist. I pushed my plate slightly away and leaned back in my chair. I didn't defend myself. I didn't need to. The silence that followed my lack of reaction was louder than any protest could have been. But inside, something irreversible had shifted. For years, I had believed that dignity was maintained by absorbing the small humiliations, letting them pass like rainwater off a tiled roof. But this wasn't rain. It was rot. And rot, if left unchecked, will take down the whole house. As I left that evening, Arjun called after me, half joking. "Don't forget, Uncle. We'll let you crash here if things get too rough." The others laughed again. I didn't answer. Because in that moment, walking to my old car under the dim streetlight, I realized I no longer wanted a seat at their table. I wanted the table, and soon I would have it. I didn't sleep much the night after that dinner. The humiliation replayed in my head. each laugh echoing like footsteps in an empty hallway. But beneath the sting of insult, there was a strange calm, like the air before a storm. I'd learned something that evening. People who mock you in public rarely expect you to have power in private. They think their perception of you is reality. That's their weakness. The very next morning, I unlocked the old teak cabinet in my study, a piece of furniture no one in the family ever bothered to ask about. Inside were 3 neat leather folders, each containing documents I'd kept organized for decades. Property deeds, lease agreements, mortgage contracts, all signed, sealed, and registered in my name. The truth was, over the years, I had quietly acquired more property than any of them suspected. Some I'd bought outright, others I had taken over from owners in distress, offering them fair prices when no one else would. A few were even in neighborhoods my relatives liked to brag about living in. That's when I remembered something Anjana had mentioned in passing a few months earlier, how the family's residential building was in a transition phase with its current landlord, an elderly man who was planning to sell. They'd been hoping to negotiate favorable terms when the time came. I didn't let the thought rest. I began making calls, not to family, of course, but to old contacts from my property circles. It turned out the building was indeed for sale, and the landlord was looking for a quick, clean deal. I offered him exactly that. Over the next few weeks, I worked quietly, never altering my routine so the family wouldn't notice. In public, I was still the same simple old man in worn shirts, driving the same old car. But in the background, I was negotiating contracts, securing the deal, and arranging for the paperwork to be ironclad. I didn't just want to buy their building. I wanted to ensure that when the time came, there would be no doubt about who held the keys, literally and legally. The day I signed the final agreement, the seller slid the file across the table, his eyes warm with gratitude. "You're a rare man," he said. "Most buyers want to squeeze every drop from a deal. You make it fair." I smiled faintly. "Fairness," I replied, "is just another form of leverage. It wasn't about evicting them or ruining their comfort. That would have been too crude, too obvious. My plan was slower, more deliberate. I wanted the shift to be undeniable, for them to understand that respect is not optional. It's the rent you pay in relationships. And soon, they would learn that their new landlord had been sitting at their table all along. 2 months after that dinner, the papers were signed, the transfers completed, and the building, every brick, every window, every lock, was mine. I kept my silence, letting life carry on as if nothing had changed. The family still saw me as the same man who arrived in his aging car, bringing modest gifts, wearing shirts that had been ironed so many times the fabric had grown soft. They didn't know that the rent checks they mailed each month would soon have my name printed at the top. My moment came on the first day of the new quarter. The old landlord's manager had resigned, and I'd instructed my property office to send formal notices to all tenants introducing the new owner. No fanfare, just a standard letter in a plain white envelope. That evening, as I sipped tea in my kitchen, my phone buzzed. It was my sister, her voice unsteady. "Bye. Did you know the new landlord is you?" I let a bead of silence hang in the air before answering softly, "Yes, Anjana. I believe we've met before." There was a long pause, broken only by a nervous laugh. This must be some mistake." "No mistake," I said, my voice calm, almost gentle. "You live in my building now. I thought you might like to know." The next Sunday I visited, not as the humble relative, but as the man who now signed off on every repair, every lease renewal. I didn't arrive in a new car or wearing flashy clothes. I didn't need to. Power doesn't announce itself. It sits quietly until it's recognized. At dinner, they were all quieter than usual. Arjun avoided my eyes, his fork scraping his plate without purpose. Pooja forced a smile, her voice overly sweet. "Uncle, we hope the rent will stay reasonable." I took a slow sip of water, set my glass down, and replied, "Rent is a reflection of respect, Pooja. Those who value where they live, take care of it." No one laughed this time. The formalities that followed were polite but distant. I reviewed their tenancy terms without raising my voice, pointing out overdue maintenance requests they'd ignored, and informing them that, as of next month, the building would operate with stricter oversight. Nothing punitive, just professional. But the unspoken truth lingered in every word. I was no longer someone they could diminish. The irony was delicious. They had mocked me for having nothing, and now, every month, they would pay me to keep their roof over their heads. And I didn't need to humiliate them to make the point. Their own discomfort did it for me. Owning the building changed nothing in my day-to-day life, but it changed everything in theirs. At first, they tried to pretend it didn't bother them. Arjun would greet me with forced cheer at family gatherings, laughing too loudly at small jokes, asking if I needed help with anything, as if kindness now might erase the memory of his insult. Pooja's tone became syrupy, her eyes darting away whenever I spoke directly to her. But the tension began to crack through their performance. One afternoon, I stopped by for a scheduled inspection. Pooja opened the door, her smile brittle. Behind her, the living room looked cluttered and unkempt, a stark contrast to the curated perfection she'd once boasted about. "We've been busy," she mumbled, stepping aside. Arjun avoided the conversation entirely, slipping into the bedroom and pretending to be on a work call. I walked through each room, making quiet notes about overdue maintenance and lease compliance. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The power shift was already suffocating them. The whispers started soon after. My sister called one evening, her voice heavy. "Bye, things are difficult. Arjun's hours were cut at work. They're struggling with the rent increase." I kept my tone steady. "The rent is the same for everyone, Anjana. Fairness doesn't bend for family." That was the truth, and the punishment. They could no longer lean on my silence, on my willingness to absorb insult without consequence. Every interaction with me now came with the reminder of their words, echoing in their own minds. The final crack came 3 months later, when Arjun approached me in the building's courtyard. His shoulders were slouched, his voice low. "Uncle, I'm sorry for what I said that night." I looked at him for a long moment. He was no longer the smug young man at the head of the dinner table. His confidence had worn thin, his pride dulled by the weight of dependence. "It's not me you need to apologize to," I said finally. "It's the man you thought I was." He nodded, but his eyes told me he didn't fully understand. Not yet. Maybe he never would. By then, it didn't matter. The insult that once burned in my chest was gone. In its place was something stronger, a quiet knowledge that I had restored the balance without lowering myself to their level. They had tried to define me with a single word, beggar. Now, they couldn't say it without tasting the bitterness of rent day. Life has a way of circling back, of returning debts that were never formally recorded. Sometimes it comes in the form of an envelope of money. Other times, it comes as a lesson that lingers far longer than cash ever could. Months passed, and the tension between us settled into something quieter. Not reconciliation, but a mutual acknowledgement of where we now stood. They paid their rent on time. They greeted me politely in the hallway. They even invited me to dinner once or twice, though the laughter at those tables was cautious, measured. I didn't go to those dinners out of spite or revenge. I went because I wanted them to see that dignity does not wither under insult. It grows when you refuse to let insult define you. I still brought simple gifts. I still dressed as I always had. My shoes remained worn, my shirt still neatly pressed but not new, because none of those things had ever measured my worth. One evening, as I was leaving after a quiet meal, Arjun stopped me at the door. His voice was low, almost hesitant. "Uncle, you could have made things very hard for us. You didn't. Thank you." I met his eyes and answered softly, "I didn't do this to hurt you. I did it so you'd remember. Never judge a man by what you think he has. Judge him by what he can build." Walking back to my car, the air was cool, carrying the faint scent of jasmine from the garden. For the first time in a long while, I felt no weight on my shoulders. The insult had been repaid, not in anger, but in quiet consequence. I didn't need them to love me. I didn't even need their respect. What I had was better, my own peace, my own dignity, and the knowledge that the table they once kept me from was, in fact, standing on my floor. Sometimes the best revenge is simply owning the ground beneath the feet of those who once looked down on you. And I did, literally.